je remercie beaucoup Giovanni Carreri et Bernard Rudiger pour m'avoir invité à être modérateur de cette séance de ce matin, qui verra en premier lieu une discussion entre l'artiste, cinéaste, musicien canadien Michael Snow, qui est ici à ma gauche, et Thomas Léon, artiste aussi, diplômé de l'École nationale de beaux-arts de Lyon et membre de l'unité de recherche ACTH qui a organisé ce colloque. Michael Snow n'a pas vraiment besoin de présentation. On a aussi eu le grand plaisir hier de voir la projection intégrale de la Région Centrale ici avec une introduction de Luca Acquarelli. Et ce matin, il y aura une discussion entre lui et Thomas Léon qui après s'ouvrira aussi au public s'il y aura des questions de votre part. Donc je remercie beaucoup Michael Snow pour être avec nous aujourd'hui. Il parlera en anglais, mais on pourra lui poser après des questions en français que je traduirai. Et je remercie aussi encore Thomas Léon, auquel je donne la parole pour commencer. Merci.
Voilà. Donc, et qui parlera dans mon cas en français et aussi dans un mauvais anglais. Voilà. Donc juste pour peut-être moi introduire mon rapport au travail de Michael Snow. Donc je suis artiste et membre du groupe de recherche ACT. En ce qui me concerne, j'ai plutôt un travail donc d'installation vidéo et qui implique l'utilisation d'images de synthèse 3D. Et donc dans ce cadre-là, ce que moi j'appelle une caméra dans le cadre de mon travail est un peu différent de ce qu'est une caméra pour quelqu'un qui fait des films sur pellicule, dans le sens où donc ce qu'on appelle une caméra en image de synthèse 3D, ça fonctionne sans la contrainte de la gravité. Et il n'y a personne qui la porte, ça peut bouger suivant des axes qui sont complètement impossibles à faire en vrai. Et donc quand j'ai découvert le travail de Michael Snow à travers la version de Wavelength de 2003, la version raccourcie, et puis après à travers la Région Centrale, en fait j'ai vu des points de convergence, et c'est pour ça que j'ai ramené ces problématiques dans le cadre du groupe de recherche. Donc j'ai I have few questions for Michael. The first question is how you made the film practically, because you say there is some mistakes in the program, and the camera is not pre-programmed. You didn't really use sounds to drive the camera. You made the movements.
Okay. This will have to be in English. This is about how the camera was directed. The technician who made the machine made a set of dials, which was really fairly simple, but for example, it had horizontal panning, so you could make the camera turn, and there'd be speeds, vitesse between 1 and 10 or something like that. And so we had panning horizontally, which and panning vertically, panning this way, whoops, and rotation. That was an interesting thing, centered on the lens, that we could rotate the camera like this, and you could control the zoom at different speeds. So a very simple thing might be, for example, to make a slow speed of 1 or speed of 2 horizontal, make the camera go around like that. And then you could add, for example, a slow rotation, 1 or 2, so that the camera would be turning like this, but would also turn like that. The thing is that, of course, there are many combinations possible, and it was an instrument which I had to learn how to play because I had never played it before. But I think that the analogy of a musical instrument is quite accurate in a way. And I had spent almost 2 years thinking about what I wanted to do with the film, thinking of but it's interesting to conceive of things that move in 3-dimensional space as opposed to in 2-dimensional space. So I was prepared with ideas, but I had never played the machine before. So this is one reason why it is a good thing that the system of pre-recorded sound to instruct the camera did not work, because it would not, I wouldn't have been able to learn in the 2 days of shooting some subtleties, because every 10 minutes was a separate shooting because the film is only 10 minutes long. So I had to compose with a decision in mind that I would make the camera do this or do this or that. But since we could not see the camera and we could not see the results, I didn't know whether anything had worked or not until we took the film to a lab in Montreal, and often things went wrong.
How long do you shoot for the film? What duration do you keep?
Sorry?
Do you keep 10% of the shoots or 5% or how?
The percentage of film that went into the final work, what was it compared to what you?
Okay, how much of what we shot was usable? We shot about 5 hours, and about the 3 hours was usable. But things went wrong. Sometimes the machine would not work, and the most serious thing was that the film broke a couple of times in the camera, and we shot the entire 10 minutes. And when we opened the camera, it was full of pieces of broken film. So we would lose a couple of hours trying to clean the camera. So there were things that went wrong that had to be solved.
And you made the music after the shooting, after the editing?
Sorry.
You made the music after the editing?
I'm sorry.
If you compose the music after the editing, if you made music.
Yes. The sound in the film was made after the editing, but the model for the sound was the original idea of having sound to direct the camera, which was a different tone at a different pitch would tell the camera to move pan horizontal or pan vertical. So I used the idea of having sound to instruct the machine as the model for the sound, but it was done after the editing.
I have maybe a few questions about my experience as a spectator of La Région Centrale. So we saw the film yesterday evening, and that was an extreme experience, and I find it a bit violent. And at the beginning, I saw some spectators moving their heads, including me, and they were trying to adapt their position to the machine, like that. And it reminded me of what you said to me Saturday about the machine in la Région Centrale as a reaction against, let's say, against stand brackage work, about the relation of the body.
The resolution.
About the problem of the body in stand brackage works, because stand brackage always carries the camera, and you see it in his films. And why do you decide to use the machine?
Well, there are a number of passages that are questionable, but I wanted to introduce an eccentric movement as opposed to the uniformity of most of the movements. And also, for example, one part which I sometimes question myself is the morning shot out of focus. And every time I see that, I think, was that a good idea? But it's one of the possibilities, just as uniform movement with a repetition to it was definitely possible. But eccentric movement was also possible. So I did some parts that have an eccentric movement to them. There's no rhythm.
Okay, but what is your relation to stand brackage?
I'm sorry.
What is your relation to stand brackage?
Well, I think he's a great filmmaker, and in some ways, what I've done is opposite to what he accomplished, because he worked on a kind of expressionist relationship between the camera person or the maker and the camera. So he wanted a personal, expressive use of the camera in the personal sense, you know. And what I've done has been mostly opposite to that, in a sense, just making the camera more autonomous than personally expressive. It's interesting that he was quite opposed to my work at first, and excuse me, I lived in New York from 62 to about 72, and after my film Wavelength was shown in 67 or 68, I heard sometimes reports that Stan Brakhage had made a speech somewhere where he had said how dangerous Wavelength was. And then there was the first showing of La Région Centrale was in a theater in New York, the first showing in New York, rather. And he was in the audience, and he left after about 10 minutes. So, but then there was a very big surprise, is one day I received a letter. This is the old-fashioned post. but it was a long letter. It was several pages, handwritten by Stan Brakhage, saying that his wife had suggested that he see La Région Centrale encore une fois. And he did, and he completely changed his mind. And he wrote a very, very long essay about what he now thought about the film. So he could change his mind.
Just to finish on my experience as a spectator, I really find the film really involves your body as a spectator, because facing the screen, I start to be really conscious of my body, of its possibilities and limits, and it was a more physical experience in a way than a lot of Brakhage movies.
This is really funny. I'm not understanding. I don't know what it is.
No problem. He said that he, by seeing La Région Centrale, he felt very bodily involved, more bodily involved than in many of Stan Brakhage's films.
But more body involved.
Bodily involved, yes. Adapting. Yeah, the position of the spectator is more bodily engaged in La Région Centrale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Maybe I can. Maybe if Bernard Rudiger can just explain to the audience his relation to the work of Picabia, to Francis Picabia, and the way when you see Francis Picabia work, en fait, la manière dont je continue en français, désolé, la manière dont quand on voit le travail de Francis Picabia, en fait, on est sans arrêt ramené à on va dire un extérieur qui n'est pas dans le travail, et la manière dont j'ai l'impression qu'en regardant les films de Michael Snow, en fait, on est sans arrêt aussi ramené à une réalité qui n'est pas celle du film, mais qui est notre propre corps, en fait. Et j'ai l'impression qu'il y a une relation entre ces deux choses, en fait.
No, yesterday we spoke about the relation. I came, so maybe it's better, easier. Yesterday we spoke about the relation between the spectator and an artwork like those of Picabia, in which your body is absolutely not involved. When you look at the machine of Picabia of the 1915, you have the impression that you don't look at the right thing and your body is not present. So you have to look around to find what you can see or what relation you can build up with this kind of object. What Thomas is saying is that he was surprised in the experience of the film. That is a machinical film. It's built up with a machine that is not a human body, but at the end, as a spectator, your body is very strongly involved in the experience, more than other films that works on this kind of experience. So the question was about this relation between the body of the spectator and what the machine is doing, what the machine is showing.
I think that's a very interesting observation. And it probably comes from the fact that camera means room in Italian, and that when you're watching the film, it's as if the room that you are in is moving. The camera that made the images is one camera, but the other camera is the one in which you are watching, and you can see, without necessarily being conscious of it, you can read the movement that you see on the screen, not only as movement passing through a rectangle that is fixed, but also that the rectangle itself is moving, which is the room that you are in is moving. And I think that when I made the film, I didn't know that this switch could happen in perception, but I think it affects how your mind and body are reading what you're seeing. And there are also optical reactions that I think emphasize not so much the body of the maker somehow, or the film got made. It's not, you don't know that there's a person involved. But I think it's that the perception of movement is so continuous that the spectator is affected in the same sort of way as one might be affected by dancing or moving in some way. So that even though you are static as a spectator, the effect of the movement can be the same kind of effect as actually moving yourself. And these are all kind of byproducts of making a film that is in continuous movement. Although the X image is interesting too, because I wanted to have something which was completely fixed as opposed to the movement. And this came about partly as an idea as to how to connect all these different sequences, each of which is based on a different set of movements. And I couldn't just cut them one to the other. And also, I didn't want to have a generic credits or a title. So in a way, this X is a title. But it also reacts to the previous movement sometimes, which is also a physiological effect. If you've been watching the movement for a long time, it's like what happens when you're in a train and a train beside you also moves. And this was also something which I hadn't foreseen, but the X's, which are supposed to be still, sometimes move a little bit, at least seem to move. So there are physiological things that happen or can happen in the spectator.
In this relation to what you said about the camera as a room that is somehow fixing what the camera is seeing, but we are also in a room and we are sitting in this room when we see the film. So we don't look only at what the camera itself has been fixing on a film. We are also projecting ourselves in what will be the moving of the camera. Yes. And I was very surprised yesterday by the experience about two things. One is that I was trying to understand the movements of the camera, and so trying to preview how the camera is moving in the room, in the place we were filming. And then I observed that the music you did and the discussion we had on Saturday about the fact that the music was done in post-editing, that the music is always coming a little bit earlier, the movements, the sounds of the movements are not at the same time of the movements, but a little bit before.
Sometimes.
And this was how it was to me a strange question about some acoustic sign that would say the camera will move. And so I am preparing myself as a spectator to imagine the movement. There is also something in time of the film, in the timing of the film, that was very strange to me. And the same question, a very similar question. After 2 hours, I had understood somehow the place you were filming.
Mm-hmm.
And all these loops and all these strange movements that are really complicated. After 2 hours, you begin to have an idea of space. And I've been a little more in the space of the camera, of the axis of the movement of the camera. And this moment, one of the films have been edited in miroir, comment on dit, on specular, in a specular way. And this was really disturbing somehow for me, because I had learned the space, and now the rock I was looking at since 2 hours has changed his position. So what is the role for you of this kind of, because you're speaking about the perception and the space and the physiological aspect of the experience, was this an idea during the editing? Was this a question of the body of the spectator and his space? Or was it an idea of the film himself? The film can be produced in the other way, in a specular way. Was this a question about perception, or was this a question about the material of the film itself and his grammar?
Well, I think it's megalomania. I wanted to do everything. And for example, I mentioned the shooting of the aube for the sunrise, which was all shot out of focus. And I do question whether I should have done that, but I did it. So that's the way the film is. And the sound embodies these decisions, because it happens before a visual movement, it happens with a visual movement, and it happens after a movement. And eventually, it separates almost completely from those kinds of relationships. In the last half hour, or maybe a little longer than that, the instructions do not have either of those three relationships. So mostly in the beginning, you're right, you can read or understand that the movement is simultaneous with a certain sound. Especially in the first half hour, because the camera is moving, panning horizontally, and then every once in a while it rises. And in most cases, the sound seems to be simultaneous. So one can, perhaps not consciously, but could consciously think, what is the connection between these two things? So they could be read as being instructions, or read as being reactions, or predictions too. So, but eventually, those relationships don't work at all, because there's a separation between, in a sense, the mind and the body, because the whole thing, in a sense, suicides at the end.
On peut aussi, bien sûr, ouvrir la discussion avec le public s'il y a des questions en anglais ou en français. Luca Quarelli.
Thank you, thank you, Michael, to be there. And I just wondering, why do you think of an acceleration of movements in the last part of the film?
Well, starting with the film Wavelength, and then the next 2 or 3 films, I was trying to make the movement of the camera as important as the image, or as important as what is depicted. So I'm not sure whether I'm going in the right direction or not here. But
Why is there an acceleration in the last part of the film?
Why is there an acceleration? Because it could be done.
Yes, but
I mean, the whole thing is built in a kind of quasi-symphonic way, that there are themes, and the themes return, and the next time they return, they might be faster or slower, or there are variations in the kind of rotation. So some of the movement themes return in the end, and they go much faster than when they were first introduced. So I was hoping that the speed would be such that it would make the entire vista become one image, which is almost successful. To say that the camera moves so fast that everything that can be seen is compressed into a very short time. So it's simply that it reaches an extreme.
because this relation to the symphonic, to a symphonic project, to a big project, and a symphonic way to construct themes, you are telling, because you are telling 2 things that seems to me interesting. One is the idea of the themes in a musical way, so that we could read La Région Centrale as a symphonical construction in which at the end we have a big theme that is stronger than the others. And now you explain this in time, in questions about time, and you began your answer speaking about wavelengths that has this cut or this difference between what the camera is filming and what is happening in the room, as something that is not overlapped. It is in the same time because the zoom is working. He has a time that is linear, and what is happening in the room is not linear, and what the film is making, how it is developed, and the colors and the sound are not in the same time of the zoom. Now, when you speak about this question of time, you can compress as much as you can see in a short time. So you are speaking about something that is linked to this idea of time that is not a regular time. Maybe you can speak, can you tell us something more about this relation between wavelengths and La Région Centrale, about this question of time?
Well, I think wavelength is much more involved in putting something in the spectator's memory, because you in the beginning of the film, one might not be aware that that the image is changing. And it'll probably be a few minutes into it that you realize that you're seeing a little bit less of the room. So it's wavelength is much more about controlling what's put in your memory, whereas La Région Centrale shows you the same subject, but it keeps on describing it with different gestures, so that even though the subject remains the same, it's seen differently, which is a little bit like like wavelength in a sense, except that it's not a cumulative. I think La Région Centrale it's not a documentary film. It doesn't show you the landscape. If the intention had been to make a film that showed, that is, documented the landscape, then it's not successful, because that's not what it's trying to do. And I mean, that was involved in choosing the location, because I didn't want it to be too interesting. Does that make sense?
Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions? Peggy Gale?
This isn't really a question, but it's suggesting you return to the path you were about to go on about camera movement, that wavelength goes forward into space, and then after that you did back and forth, and the camera went tick, 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 tick. And with La Région Centrale, it's spinning all over the place. And you've often in the past referred to your investigation of camera movement. So that sounds like a simple thing. Okay, what can a camera do? It can go forward, it can go back and forth, it can go in circles. But it's never that simple, because there's also the issue of time and what you don't see. So maybe you could go into that a little bit, the camera movement thing, because this is the most extreme camera movement film. With La Région Centrale, this camera is seeing things that the human eye can only see through the camera lens. The spectator's body can't be spinning in space and going upside down. And when I find, I mean, I've seen the film a number of times, when I find myself trying to anticipate where the landscape will happen, the camera moves up to the sky, and then the land comes from somewhere completely unexpected. Suddenly the land is coming from here or from over there. So the camera movement is something that is very deliberate, but has kind of perverse effects for the viewer. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think that all I could repeat is that wavelength. I should say that perhaps it's interesting that wavelength was done by hand. This is another. Sometimes I've seen written descriptions of it, which talks about that the zoom was automatic. But it very definitely wasn't automatic. It was I moved the zoom lens by hand, because there are changes on almost every frame. It's not automatic in any sense. So that's a different thing too. It does bring the body in the same way as with La Région Centrale, that it was an instrument played by me by hand. So I don't. With you mentioned back and forth, and that was an attempt to make it seem as if it was done by a machine, if the film was made by a machine, because of the rigidity. I did move the camera by hand using a stopwatch, but I made two barriers so that the camera would hit this one and then hit this one. But the sound again was done after, and it is the sound of a machine that I made to make this sound. So that back and forth was definitely an attempt to make it believable that the motion was the panning of the camera was done by a machine, but in fact it was done also by hand. So
I have a question maybe now. You've described several times in this conversation your relationship to the dispositif of la Région Centrale, meaning the camera and its possible movements, as the relationship of a musician with an instrument that is learning how to use as the film is being done. And I'd like to take this opportunity to perhaps ask you more in general a question on how your activity as a musician, as a piano player, has influenced your approach to filmmaking.
Well, it's true that I use analogies into music fairly frequently in talking about the films. And the music that I've been involved in, the most important sort of core of that is totally free improvisation. But I have done many things that are very, very strict composition. For example, I made an LP or two LPs called The Last LP, which is completely studio composition. And also I have been commissioned to compose for other groups. So, but the main endeavor which I've been involved in since the 50s is totally free improvisation. But in the films, there's very little totally free improvisation. Certainly, there are things that I make happen that are unpredictable, but it's not quite the same thing as doing, for example, Stan Brackage's films often are more improvised than mine, in the sense that he made it up as he was shooting, so to speak. But I haven't done that. Usually there is a fair bit of planning.
Right. In this pre-planning of your films, did you use notations, kinds of notations, and also in your musical compositions, did you use standard musical notations, or did you try to come up with alternative forms of writing music?
Just to complicate things, I can't read music.
You cannot?
No.
Okay.
But I can compose.
Right. So how, when you composed, how you must have used some kind of notation, I imagine, or did you use recordings of your own improvisation to then, how did you, because composing is about also writing down something that can be executed by somebody else at some point.
About 10 years ago, I was commissioned by Eve Agoyan, who is Adam Agoyan's sister, a very fine pianist, and a group that she was playing with, which was a classical quartet. and they only played commissioned new music, mostly from Canadian composers. And she asked me to compose something for this quartet, at which time I had to confess that I was a folk musician. But I was flattered and honored, and I tried to find a way that I could compose something for this group, which was cello, violin, piano, and clarinet. And I found out that there is a computer solution
that can transcribe
which is
live.
that you can play on a keyboard whatever you want, and this can be transcribed to musical notation. So I did compose it's a 15-minute 3-part piece for this classical quartet using this method. But I should say that it's not easy, because you have to retain, you play the part separately. You're going to do this part and then remember and play back that you want to put the clarinet here and so it took about a week to do, but it is notation, and they have played it. Actually, it's been played 3 times in public. So okay, the range of what I've done with music, and also there are sound installations which I've done, which are gallery works, but that concentrate on sound. But I think I wandered away from your...
No, absolutely not. I was asking about the relationship between your involvement with music and sound and your filmmaking. I think Luca Querelli has another question.
Coming back to La Région Centrale, I was wondering, according to which aesthetical ideas did you choose the images among the totality of shooting? Because you said that you have 5 hours of shooting and you just editing 3 hours. So I wonder, according to which aesthetical ideas did you choose among these 5 hours of shooting to make 3 hours film?
Well, I wanted to, the original idea was to try to do something like shooting every hour or something like that, so that the entire film would be a day, or at least a sunrise to sunset or something like that. And things would go wrong, and sometimes it was hard to do that. But eventually, I was able to make that temporal sequence work. But the original shooting contained the helicopter and the crew at the site doing various things, and it showed what I shot. I shot the departure of the helicopter with the idea of leaving the machine, so to speak. And I edited that, so the first version of La Région Centrale contained about 10 minutes at the beginning of the presence of the people there on the site. And sometimes you have to go too far to find out that you've made a mistake. So at the first screening, I thought, this is really wrong. And I cut that section off. So, and then just to continue this particular story, I naturally retained that little piece of the film. And a programmer who usually programs for the New York Film Festival, named, I can't think of his name. It's such a funny name. Mark McElhead, thank you. Peggy remembers names. He was curating something, and he had the idea that he would ask filmmakers to show things of their own that they had rejected, which was kind of an interesting idea. And so there were 2 nights of rejections by various filmmakers, and I sent him that part of what was La Région Centrale, and it was shown. And then it was supposedly returned, but I never received it. It was lost. I've never been able to find it. That's a story.
Thank you. Markus Klammer.
I have 2 technical questions regarding La Région Centrale. The first one is, where do the sounds of the film come from? Did you record them, or were they rather programmed by a synthesizer? And the second question is, how did you choose the focus for each of the 10 minutes take of La Région Centrale?
Well, the sound was done. I edited it in studios in Montreal, and I asked a sound technician to make a little synthesizer. This was before synthesizers were more commercially available. They did exist, but they were very expensive, and it didn't seem necessary to actually rent or borrow an ARP or a Moog, which did exist. So I just described the pitches that I wanted. It's only 4 or 5 notes, and this man, he made this little machine. And then, so I edited the film, and I wrote a description for my own use of at what frame, after what duration was there a change in the camera motion, and what kind of change it was. So I had a kind of a script, which was to reinforce, trying to make the sound in real time. We screened the edited film, and I made the sound to the projection. What was the other question? Oh, well, each shot was they're all 10 minutes, but I didn't only use 10-minute lengths, obviously, but each bobine is 10 minutes. So we would set them up to start in the right place, whether it was pointing this way or pointing that way or whatever, and change the focus depending on what the camera was going to see.
And you could do that in real time, changing the focus.
You had to do focus by hand. Yeah.
I was just curious about the relationship to painting in your work, because we could also question La Région Centrale in terms of landscape painting and what it does to the horizon. So I was wondering if you could say a few words about painting for you.
Wow, I didn't get that either, sorry.
Sure. La Région Centrale can be interpreted as in relationship to landscape painting because the changing position of the horizons
Yeah,
is so interesting.
yeah.
So if you could say something about your relationship to painting, and especially in the case of La Région Centrale.
Okay. Well, certainly, it's a kind of landscape painting, and while I didn't refer to or make any particular study of landscape paintings, I think I was more aware that it was going to be the first landscape film. And so how do you make a landscape film was the question. But I've mentioned before that not only is it depicting a landscape, but the first importance for me was the camera movements and how they would be perceived. Not so much only to record and show a landscape, but to show the movement of the camera on that landscape or of that landscape. So there's no particular reference to landscape painting by any particular person. It's just it is the historic background of depicting the landscape. Yeah.
Je pense que nous avons encore le temps pour une dernière question, s'il y en a.
I wanted to ask you something about narrative in your films. Narrative. Because often when we talk about experimental film, we always say, oh, it's nothing to do with narrative. But when I had discussed some of your films with Morgan Fisher, and he said a very interesting thing. He said, if you look at the films by Michael Snow, like La Région Centrale or Back and Forth, you can sense that there is a sort of Aristotelian dramaturgy because there is climax. So I wanted to ask you if there were any, what is your relationship to narrative? If it's something that you were interested in developing, and since you said that La Région Centrale is really nothing to do with landscape painting, apart from the fact that it's a landscape, maybe narrative is a way to dwell on this question. Thank you.
Well, I am not and haven't been interested in narrative, in watching it in other people's work, or in using it in my work. The only places where I think I've tried to tell stories is the relationship between between two events in wavelength, where there's the man falls to the floor, and later on there is a telephone call, and that's the only thing I would call narrative. But I did make a gallery film. It's not shown. It can be shown as an auditorium film, but it's basically a gallery work, and it's called short story, or Sturti. So I put one word on top of the other, and it is something. This was a deliberate attempt to tell a story, but it's a story that was shot in real time, but is edited, folded one part on the other part, so there's a superimposition of what's to come with what is happening in the present. So it is a story, but I guess my background is not so much in cinema or knowing about cinema, but more the world of painting and sculpture. So I would think more of abstract painting in a sense than of narrative film. I don't have any influences from narrative film in a sense.
Yeah. We are discussing a little bit the relationship between your work and stem breakage, but I also would like to know if you think that there is any relationship between La Région Centrale and The Man with the Camera by Vertov, because I think that in both films, the camera is the protagonist. In both films are concerned with movements, not only with the image or with narrative. And above all, both films are, we can talk about a symphony, because it's really conceived as rhythm, as a relationship between movement and the time and the timing. So that's it. Thank you.
Yes, there's definitely a relationship between A Man with a Movie Camera and La Région Centrale. And in fact, a book has been written about comparing them with, I can't remember the title. You remember the title? Peggy, do you remember the title? Yeah. But of course, the Man with the Movie Camera is, I mean, it makes use of some machine shooting, like shooting from a train. I think there's, but basically it's more to do with a man with a movie camera, with the fact that the camera can go anywhere, but it has to be taken somewhere by a man. So there's quite a big difference in a way, because La Région Centrale, even though a man, namely me, operated it, it's still not visible or not an evident part of it. It seems to be done by a machine. Of course, all films are made by a machine. But I think there is certainly a connection. And if I could think of the title, I would recommend this book.
The title of the book is Vert of Snow Faroki, Machine, Vision and the Post-Human.
Yeah.
Et est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions? Oui. Alors, Raymond Bellour.
So, Michael, about narrative, what about corpus callosum, which is full of stories? What? Corpus callosum. What about corpus callosum? It's full of stories, of narratives.
I don't think of them as stories,
sort of,
but as transformations.
Yeah, but there are actions, when the two people go to the toilet, for example, it's a story, in a way.
Okay. Well, I don't think corpus callosum uses images of people that are modified, and that's what happens in the film. I don't think that stories are told. Actions are depicted, but I don't think it's a story. Or, yeah. Raymond, you're a very perceptive writer, so I should probably agree with you.
encore question? Non. Alors on s'arrête là. Et on remercie vraiment beaucoup Michael Snow pour avoir été avec nous aujourd'hui.